വീഡിയോ ഓഡിയോ കാണാം. ആരും മിണ്ടുന്നില്ലേ തന്നെ.
ഹലോ
ആരും മിണ്ടുന്നില്ല. കാണാത്ത റേഞ്ച് ഇല്ലാണ്ടാണ്.
Dr. Varghese, if I may request you to kindly mute your audio.
Mute. Yeah, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. Mute.
Just a few moments, waiting for Dr. Rajesh. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Apologies for the delay in beginning. We have with us for the very first Grameen Talk Series, Dr. Sudarshan R Kottai. I am Amit Upadhyay from the School of Livelihoods and Development. Welcome to this very first talk as part of a series of talks that we have imagined. We would like to begin by introducing Dr. Sudarshan. So I call upon Ms. Survi Singh from Rural Development and Governance Program Semester 3 to kindly introduce Dr. Sudarshan.
Thank you so much, sir. A very good afternoon to one and all. I welcome you all to the Grameen Series talk initiated by Rural Development and Governance MA program in the School of Livelihoods and Development, EISS, Hyderabad. So before we begin with the talk, I take immense pleasure in introducing our speaker of the day to all the participants. Sudarshan R Kottai is Assistant Professor in the Department of Psychology, Jain University Bengaluru. Sir is a RCI licensed clinical psychologist and has worked in the same capacity at Lokopriyo Gopinath Bordoloi Regional Institute of Mental Health, Tejpur, Assam, a tertiary mental health care institution. Sir's doctoral work carried out at the Department of Liberal Arts, Indian Institute of Technology, Hyderabad, revolved around everyday narratives and practices of mental health care and chronicity that are constructed by official discourses of state and biomedicine. Sir's research has been published in peer-reviewed journals such as Medical Anthropology, Cross-Cultural Studies on Health and Illness, Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, and Economic and Political Weekly. Sir speaks to the following areas of scholarship: PSY interventions with the marginalized or minority population, mental health in context of gender, disabilities, and sexualities, and intersections in mental health from multidisciplinary perspectives. Sir follows issues related to public administration that have direct consequences to life in general and human mentation in particular. So it is indeed an honor to have you with us today for discussing and understanding the nuances of mental health and migrant workers, which is of very utmost significance in these unprecedented times of pandemic coronavirus. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the kind introduction. Actually, I am facing a lot of internet issues, so actually I'm getting dropped out also because it's raining heavily here, so I may not be able to on the video also because it's like 2 times I got dropped out, so I don't know like how far I will be able to sustain also because It's raining heavily.
Okay, okay.
So, Shah,
Would you like to start immediately? Then we thought we would like to just speak a few words about the series itself, because this is the first lecture. Would it be okay if we take 2-3 minutes?
yeah, fine, no problem.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. I now hand over to Dr. Shahul Ameen, Assistant Professor at the School of Livelihoods and Development. He will briefly introduce this new talk series. Over to you, Dr. Shahul.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Considering the time, I may read out one or two paragraph. It's about the concept of Grameen Talk Series, what we have introduced. So Grameen, both as a conceptual category and as physical space, has been one of the imperative concerns of colonial modernity as well as late modernity. A strands of the early modern scholarships, mostly Indologist, account for the autonomous and self-sufficient nature of villages in general and Indian villages in particular. While such an exotic depiction of villages undoubtedly invited manifold interrogations, particularly the empiricism of the field view arguably dismissed the findings of these text views. The era of village studies worked more on the areas of assessing the impact of the program, arriving at policy recommendations, and designing the choices, among others. Subsequently, several strong criticism on the state-centric economic policies followed. The notion of rural governance, for example, highlighted the new range of interconnections among government bodies and between these bodies and social organizations. The era of economic reforms witnessed the emergence of some new research institute and studies on policy consequences. Apart from livelihood concerns, sensitivity towards appropriateness, people-centric development, environmental policy, and cultural rights are noteworthy in this context. The emerging concepts of practices centered around biocultural understanding, sustainable village development, and cultural economy, etc., demand further thoughts. As a perspective, following Kuldeep Mathur, the post-empiricist call for using interpretative and discursive techniques for understanding rural discourses and practices find considerable acceptance among practitioners and researchers of the rural. So acknowledging all these concerns, the Grameen Talk series is designed to engage with the rural question at the crossroad. Keeping Grameen or rural at the locus, as the locus, this series engaged with contemporary development concerned with invariably shapes the life at rural. Apart from addressing the intrinsic village issues, the talk series recognize the making of Grameen at the intersection of larger processes pertaining to political economy, human development, migration, and nation building. Addressing these ongoing issues, such as pandemic, these talks will highlight the intricate interconnections between local and global in the field of health, economy, politics, culture, gender, self, and identity, and so on. Moreover, it brings to fore how the state and institutions or organization function, particularly during the crisis situation. This discussion certainly will attract the attention of the practitioners, rural foot soldiers, professionals, academics, and students. A Grameen Talk Series is an initiative of the Rural Development and Governance Program of the School of Livelihood and Development, Tata Institute of Social Science, Hyderabad campus. It is scheduled to be held on Thursday afternoons. It will follow the lecture cum discussion format, and it's primarily aimed to enrich the learning of the students of Rural Development and Governance Program and other programs. Meanwhile, it also interest among those working on rural question and also activists and policymakers concerned with the problems of village communities. So looking forward to your participation and support for this new learning initiative. Thank you. Amit?
Thank you, Dr. Shahul. Dr. Rajesh has joined us. So, Dr. Rajesh, over to you. You can conduct the proceedings. Dr. Sudarshan is ready to talk. So, over to you, Rajesh. Hello, Rajesh.
I think his connection is lost. Yeah, he's there.
Yeah. Dr. Sudarshan, can I request you to please deliver your talk? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me for this talk series, and I'm really excited to know about this Grameen Talk Series also. It's really a privilege. So today I will be talking on my mental health and migrant workers. I think my audio is okay and my PPT is also visible, right?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Please.
Oh, okay. So I will. Uh, Yeah. So we are living in the time of COVID and mental health and migrant workers. So
I'm sorry,
to give a
Sudarshan, your PowerPoint is not visible. I'm sorry to interrupt.
oh, okay. I will upload it. Maybe I have to upload it again.
Maybe you share it again, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Because of that, here the internet is like very unstable. So
Sorry about that.
is it now?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. I'll put it. Yeah. So mental migrant workers. So my talk will actually delve into the mental health causes state with regard to the migrant workers. Before going to mental health as such, I wish to give a context to this talk. So it is situated in the the migrant and state. So we have seen COVID-19 as a field, it has not been so. It has extent in the society has become more marginalized, like double marginalization. So it has affected the marginalized sections more than the privileged sections. Now also we have seen how policies also have been discriminatory in the state and how the social response also, like how how the social fissures that are present in the society got uh, exposed during the crisis of COVID. So marginalized have been targets of hatred, violence, and state disposition. And we have seen how the state itself has shown double standards and treated people unequally, certain categories of people. We have seen how the privileged class who were stranded in other countries abroad, including China, were evacuated to India at the expense of the state. But the government was completely oblivious of the migrant workers, and that the lockdown was imposed on March 23rd 8 p.m. and it started at 12 o'clock, giving only 4 hours time to people to get back to the village. It itself shows the government was completely unaware about migrant workers, or it was completely out of mind about the state will actually respond and how they will face this lockdown. So even though the migrant workers are a gigantic force in our country, which contributes to economic development, but it is on from the purview of the state, particularly with regard to their crisis. We have seen how they were invisibilized. And E-Science was talking about talking about this migrant crisis, that even though certain measures were became so processed. It was mostly only then they know that this is a huge force, that a huge number of people are there, because there is no data as such, like about robust data on migrant workers. And I'm not going deeply into all this because it is already, we know so many reports, so many newspaper reports have come about how the class consciousness, environmental consciousness, race discrimination, race discrimination, etc., all came to surface, and it was very explicitly visible how Dalits were treated by the high caste people, and how minority races became the targets in the times of war. And even Northeast people were racially discriminated. The news had come up. But this talk will be largely looking at the migrant workers crisis. So I would like to, I prefer to call guest worker because I feel it's done by the government of Kerala because it looks more inclusive and more like kind of that shows certain kind of belongingness. I think use of language is important. Language sometimes actually how we perceive that to the community. So migration, when Professor Iruday Rajan, who is working at Center for Development Studies, who has done a lot of work on migration, he says that migration is not at all different development in our country, and there is no data on migration at all. So this lockdown, which was imposed all of a sudden at 8 p.m. and it started after 4 hours, itself shows that the government was not aware. And one of the most affected category is also because migration is mobility itself is a livelihood of this category. When mobility is restricted, the livelihood is actually hampered. It also talks about there is no humanizing of data. Also, even if data is available, it is actually that there is lack of humanization of data because everyone talks about NRIs or there are a lot of economic benefits when people who are migrating, but the person behind the remittances are not under the burden. And particularly, there is no data at all. That's what the legislature says. There are no robust data on migration in India. And also, when the tsunami trains were introduced, the government was not sure where to send the train because there is no data on where people are clustered, where migrants are put up the migrant corridors. And state that if you can have COVID-19 data analysis of people, we have a national migration survey because there is a kind of invisibilization against category. Sorry, I got disconnected. Am I audible now?
You're audible, Dr. Sudarshan.
Okay, I need to upload. Is my PPT visible now?
It is visible.
Okay. Yeah. So, so this aligns with what Harshmantha talks about looking away from the part of the state also, like certain categories are like not being given attention. And during the migrant crisis, during the COVID crisis, we have known how this category of people suffered on account of lack of food, lack of shelter, lack of transport, and there was a lot of there was a mass exodus on food. People were killed en route. So some of the sad scenes which are there in the public memory, but at least some which were like very horrendous and it was like which breaks the conscience of any human being. Like one pregnant wife and infant daughter was carried on a car from Hyderabad to Balaghat in Madhya Pradesh, covering 700 kilometers. And mother was seen dragging a suitcase on which her son fell asleep. A journey of 800 kilometers. And the National Human Rights Commission took a suo motu case seeing this news report. And the report says, that I quote, "It's strange that the pain of the child and the family could be seen and felt by many and good, except local authorities." And one of the tragic incidents in which many people were killed at 116 migrant workers were killed when they were sleeping on the railway track. So, P. Sainath again outlined, said that there were no, the usual protocol was not employed and there was no helpline put in place, which also shows how this accident was invisible, like the victims were invisible, the names were not. And also we saw one 13-year-old girl who drove her father back home covering a distance of 1,100 kilometers. The site was 500 and they had only 600 as per the rupees with them for travel according to reports. And also when the Shramik train got introduced on May 1, first from Linkampally in Hyderabad to Jharkhand, after so much of clashes between the police and the migrant workers housed in various camps, which was not having enough facilities, basic food, all this. So there also, after the trains are introduced, there are also reports of lack of food and water on the trains and leading to loss of lives in those reports. So this again points to, like, I would like to invoke Shiva Vishwanathan, who talks about cognitive justice. So it's a denial of cognitive justice, like that they are not in the framework of the state, like almost completely. So before I move to mental health, maybe I think because people from different disciplines must have joined, so I would like to introduce the current status of side disciplines. Side disciplines include the psychiatric nursing, psychiatric social work, clinical psychology, and psychiatry. These are which are directly involved with the mental health care professionals. So people call it sciences like side disciplines. So we have seen how the discipline of psychology, psychiatry, etc., have been trying to be in the camp of medicine to become more scientific and objective. After the age of science, 19th century onward, when sciences got a lot of objective measures to for scientific investigations and all. The psychology also and psychology always try to become more scientific and in line with hard science. So there is also an identity crisis in psychology, psychiatry, because it has to dealing with mind and it is very abstract and how to become scientific. When it is becoming scientific, is it using something which is the essence of that discipline? Like one of the psychologists said that psychology started off as defining mind as defining the discipline as defined it as study of the soul and study of the mind and study of consciousness. Now it has become study of behavior and mental process. So he says that psychology first lost its mind, then its soul, then its consciousness. It has only behavior with its thoughts. So that actually shows how the discipline has moved, like from something which is close to philosophy, close to abstract notions, to something which is like very concrete, like scientific, and we can understand mind through behaviorism, all this. So there have been a lot of developments in that line. So psychiatry also as a discipline has been trying to become more scientific and also facing an identity crisis because the medical comes under the medical discipline after madness or abnormal behavior came under the ambit of medicine. So psychiatry also comes in the camp of medicine, but whether it is completely a medical discipline because it's dealing with something very abstract, and when we compare psychiatry with other medical disciplines, we find that we import a lot of terminologies from the medical, like diagnosis, disease, but it is not applicable to psychiatry also, because there is nothing called disease in psychiatry, because there is nothing so objective, localized brain pathology or something. There is nothing conclusive evidence for any of the mental disorders. We talk about signs, symptoms, syndromes, not like that. Not so many psychiatrists themselves question the use of such medical terminologies, because it becomes too medical in its approach. So psychiatrists claim to be an objective science is also questioned, because when it is a science, it looks like there is no need for value ladenness. It is something apolitical. But researchers and people working within the field of psychiatry and outside, like anthropologists, critical theorists, have actually shown that psychiatry is not objective, and its practice at least is completely based on subjective evaluations. And this shoring up it as a medical discipline is actually just not helping people also. So this biomedical, because we have so many approaches, and so that itself shows that there is no conclusive understanding about mind or mental health or mental illness or whatever. So these are all being talked about from various perspectives within psychiatry and psychology. So we have so many psychologies and many psychiatries rather than one psychology and one psychiatry. So, but at the same time, even though we have so many perspectives, the dominant model that is followed by mainstream psychiatric disciplines or psychological disciplines is the biomedical model. And people have also said that there is a lot of power imbalance, because the kind of the medical approach actually does not consider the perspective of the users of the services. So there is a power imbalance between the provider and the user, and also power imbalance in other sense, like the UN rapporteur on right to health. In his report in 2017, he himself is a psychiatrist by profession, Daniel Puras. He said that there is the major mental health issues are actually rooted in power imbalance, but psychiatry, biomedical psychiatry, biological psychiatry within psychiatry itself is acting as gatekeepers, and this problem of power imbalance is increasingly being framed as problems within the brain and framed as mental disorders to be treated with psychological or psychiatric. So psychiatry is facing from within and without due to all this developments. And also, unlike the disciplines, in psychiatry, we have user survivor movement, who are users of services of psychiatry themselves have come up against psychiatric practice that our concerns are not taken into account, and most of the treatments have been imposed onto people and is violating basic human rights. But at the same time, we take the case of India, even now we know like mainstream mental health disciplines are mostly mental health disciplines, or mental health system in India is increasingly medicalized according to literature. So people earlier used to talk like no health without mental health, but the recent report in 2020 by the same even special rapporteur on right to health said that mental health system itself is is doing a lot of human rights violations, and it has to look beyond this chemical imbalance, often scapegoat of psychiatry, and try to understand power imbalance, come out from the clinic and try to understand what are the problems which are being faced by people and people's mental health. And also social justice, equity, inclusion, socially responsive approaches have also been documented. So when we come to health also, if we go as per the official definition of WHO, it is health is a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being. But in practice, because it is taught to every psychologist, psychiatrist, or any MBBS student or medical student, but after it is taught, maybe they are made to forget, according to many scholars, because the way in which it is practiced, medicine is practiced, actually completely denies the role of social or the mental well-being, like how these are interrelated. So it becomes mostly the physical body is treated and intervened without regard to how that physical body is enmeshed in the larger ecology, larger political, social situations. So certain scholars within healthcare have said that healthcare has become catastrophic to healthcare because commodification of health and how a certain inappropriate use of technology in health is actually hampering the healthcare and inducing problems for people who are seeking. Also, shift of healthcare from care to cure. So, like even Hippocrates talked about, the care should be more like the aim of medicine is to care, cure. Advancements, the more focus has been on curing, and there is no partnership between the medical system and the person, family, and the community, because it's mostly one-sided. The medical system decides what needs to be done, or the psychiatric system decides what are the problems and what are the solutions. So, for example, when the migrant workers crisis happened, they came out with a order that they need to be given counseling and mental health services. So it was no migrant worker has ever asked for counseling, because they were asking for transport, they were asking for food, they were asking for a way back home. But the services provided, which came to limelight, is that migrant workers have been all national institutes have been brought in to provide tele-counseling and counseling. So this itself shows how provider-centric is healthcare. And also person to disease. So it has shifted that focus from the person to disease, and use of more technological intervention by sidelining what is certain scholars like Dr. Rajagopal, who has made palliative care in Kerala. He says that there is no love in healthcare because it has completely become cure, and we have forgotten that person who is being treated, because we are looking at images and treating without having a conversation with the patient. So it has become so practical and bureaucratic healthcare. So disregard social realities. So we talk about social well-being, but social epidemiology, social determinants of health. In healthcare itself, it is important. But when it comes to what I want to point out is that even in health, it is being criticized that it is very important to look at all this, because health is something it is enhanced in all these social realities. But it becomes more important because mental health, because compared to other disciplines, mind is something so abstract, and there is no objective scientific investigations like TB diagnosis. There is nothing called so strict diagnosis, because no conclusive diagnosis and conclusive evidence for any of the psychiatric disorders also. So it's a gray area. It's operating in a very ambiguous plane. It's not so straightforward. So even in health, they have talked about in healthcare, like universal health coverage 2018, Astana Declaration, because in the previous one was of health for all. So now they talk about health for all has to be health with all. So it has even in healthcare they talk about including people who are using the services, community empowerment, and they need to take care of. They also should share the power of health services. So, but when it comes to mental health practice, again, it becomes very, very important, because it is a very ambiguous territory in which mental health is operating. So even psychiatrists, so coming to psychiatry now, from health, mental health, social health, whatever. So in psychiatry also similar voices are different by psychiatrists say that lack of political involvement in psychiatry has been the most important, most significant failures of psychiatry, because it has failed to look at a person beyond that body, because most of the mental health problems are actually related to social oppression, structural violence, and drivers of structural drivers. So he says, according to him, political engagement appears a moral imperative for a credible profession with coherent values. So how values are inculcated, how ethics need to be brought back, or how that the art element, the art side of medicine need to be brought back. And UN also has said in 2019 that social justice and quality of social relations are main determinants of mental health, and it has criticized the global movement of mental health and the global psychiatry, like the global mainstream psychiatry, to actually look at these rather than pathologizing people on the basis of a simple diagnosis, which is not as straightforward as any other diagnosis category in other disciplines. So even in COVID-19 also we can hear the WHO guidelines which came out in response to COVID-19. Many scholars are within psychiatry or mental health has questioned that. So for example, in Nature journal, Burgess wrote that the WHO responses are actually missing out on social reality and systemic vulnerabilities like poverty, because it's very individualized intervention which is promulgated by the global body. So she also asked, like, woman who has lost her job and not done will be benefited by a meditation app. Because we see during any such crisis, we see so many apps and webinars, like how depression immediately, like Sushant Singh Rajput, immediately what is the what can be done with depression, and how mental health professionals are there to depression and to seek mental care. So increase in services becomes the individualized care that becomes very prominent. So concerns of increasing prescription of psychiatric drugs during COVID-19 has also come to the fore. People have criticized that sadness and anxiety, which are actually natural responses to an unprecedented situation. Everybody will naturally go through certain sadness and anxiety because of it's a very different situation that everyone is facing. But there is overstating of mental health problems rather than the associated social problem, which actually cause mental health issues. So even when we come to India now, the core of mental health responses, we have seen how the centrally run tertiary care mental health institutions were roped in by the government of India to provide counseling to migrant workers. So helpline number, you see one of the screenshot. It was so straight, like, or like that mental health concern that becomes so important, because there is nothing which goes beyond the individual, beyond. So mental health is framed as an individual problem. It needs to be intervened and treated by the mental health professionals through certain professional knowledge and skills. So it actually does not provide any rights-based language, and mental health itself is so restricted to individual interventions. So even the National Institute of Mental Health and Neuroscience, which is an institution in India, was asked tertiary institutions also to assess states and also to provide counseling and community-based, to extend services to them. So if you take the, if you see the enhanced guidelines on COVID-19 mental health guidelines, it actually asks you in practice where the non-specialists are actually doing the job of the specialist to prescribe psychiatric medicines when there is mental health concern. So there is a lot of ambiguity about about diagnosis, about understanding whether a person is distressed or whether a person is depressed. So there is no such strict division. It's very hard to diagnose actually in psychiatry. So NIMHANS even told the High Court of Karnataka that it provided counseling to 21,000 migrant workers. And the NIMHANS alumni themselves came out against NIMHANS as per the reports that NIMHANS closed its doors for people who are seeking tertiary care health services, because it is a tertiary care institution where severe people suffering from severe mental health issues actually seek treatment. So it was closed. So NIMHANS alumni again themselves came out against that move. So poor patient had to rely on private hospitals for follow-up treatment in that hospital. So because all of these mental health institutions are involved mostly in that field on account of this direction to provide counseling to lockdown citizens as well as migrant workers. So we can see that in some of the some news report which came out that government provide counseling. Also, we see how certain psychiatric journals also came out with the certain articles saying that there is a need to actually increase access to migrant workers because they are more vulnerable to mental health issues. So what I argue here is that this kind of approach to mental health, deflecting attention of already the government is saying that there is a shortage of mental health professionals. There is only 0.3% of psychologists and 1% of psychiatrists. I don't know the exact figure, very less to 1 lakh population. There is a need to improve mental health professionals. So, but at the same time, it's a paradox. Like when severely mental health, people who are suffering from serious mental disorders are not able to access services, there is lack of professionals. the same institutions have been asked to provide counseling by shutting the doors to people who are really facing problems. And this problem, it cannot be also, I argue that it cannot be seen as a mental health problem. It's a human rights issue where psychiatry has no role. So many scholars have talked about how psychiatry was born in asylum, but now psychiatry treats everything, like everything, because it tries to bring everything under its strength, like increase that reach of feel everything can be everybody. If somebody is sad, psychiatrist has the answer. Right? If somebody is anxious, psychiatrist. So there is a lot of popular discourse that psychiatry is there to make people happy, and there is a monoculture of happiness can be created by psychiatric disciplines. And also Boyle, she's a clinical psychologist who writes that this focus on the individual is so common among this mental health professions that it creates an institutional ignorance about how our personal context relate to how we feel, think, and act. And it also overstates vulnerability in the vulnerability stress model. So when you take this issue also, like it is completely denying the experiences, the sufferings, the toxic environment in which they're, they are situated. So it also reinforces the idea that context are consequences and not causes. So for example, there will be like poverty, that mental health issues can lead to poverty, but the other way, like poverty leading to mental health. So there is, so this difference. So this is like very overstating vulnerability on certain migrant or certain sections that they are vulnerable always, and there is a need to improve health services to them. And COVID, the fear of social contact. So she poignantly states that there is why psych disciplines are so afraid of social contact. Why don't they actually try to understand the social context? Sorry, is my PPT visible now?
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay. How much time I have? And,
yeah, you have another 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay.
Yeah.
So, okay. So she also says that there's a fear of social context in psych disciplines. So this also is related to how psychiatry or psych disciplines actually align the powerful groups so that they are not brought into scrutiny. So also Rimke again states that the mainstream mental health systems actually fail to locate mental and emotional distress as social justice issue. So it does not go beyond the physical body. That social body and the physical body does not come under the purview as required or as warranted by certain definitions or certain like philosophies of health. As I talked earlier, everyday life. So beyond this quote unquote mental illness to treat they have everyday everything. So that actually affects subjectivities of people also. That popular discourse that psychiatry and psychology is there tracking well. By that at the same time obliterating the social and political forces which at the same time create the same situation, same mental health issues. So also this kind of intervention is also, I think it is a demonstration that development is being done by the states, like migrant workers. So in psychiatry there is a lot of maneuverability and there is a lot of room for practice. There is no room for accountability because there is lack of objectivity at all. It's completely dependent on the provider on subjective evaluation of symptoms, signs which lead to syndromes, and there is a disorder which is diagnosed. Can change from time to time, from clinician to clinician, from context to context also. So psych profession also, by this actually psych profession is gain visibility and there's certain there's a need to really come into the time of medicine to see identity crisis. So this, when we extrapolate it or take it fast forward, we will see how social scientists and other activists are actually expressed concerns about this various papers or articles, mental health, only voice is about services. So even Ramachandra Kuka or Raj Bhargava or Sanjeev Barua, all of them are social scientists. Mental health interventions are at the same time, in contrast to this, mental health interventions are, there is a lot of flexibility gifting free mental health helplines and free treatment, psychopharmaceuticals to migrant workers. So this actually creates a very reductionistic state. Individual who is suffering is asked or sought to understand about actually cause which also take actually this kind of stuff. The emphasis on mental institutions have become technocratic, as I told earlier. Lack of emphasis on the person and more on disease, more on cure rather than cure. And this kind of medical model or biomedical model, it persons as patients for and distress and resolving imbalance of the report and scholarship also.
Hello.
Yeah, Rajesh, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, Dr. Sudarshan, you have done, right? Hello. Hello, Dr. Sudarshan. The last part was not clear to me. See, that's why I'm asking. Hello.
Just check if he is there. He may have dropped out.
Yeah, that's what I think. Let me check.
No, he's there. He's there. I could see. Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, Dr. Sudarshan. Yeah, he's there, but I think his audio is muted.
Yeah, actually, sorry. Actually, I got dropped out. So
Okay.
after I got it back, I need to again unmute it. I forgot it. Sorry. So maybe can I take another maybe 5 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Is my PPT visible? I think I need to upload it again because is my PPT visible now?
No, it's not visible. It's not visible.
Okay. It's difficult for me to upload it now because it's not getting uploaded. There is.
Maybe you can address the whatever you stated in the PowerPoint without uploading it. Perhaps that.
Yeah. That can be done. Yeah, I will continue then. Yeah. So also there is a lack of rights-based language from mental health. So even one of the psychologists, Neeraj Desai, was written a book called Towards Movement in Clinical Psychology. He says that there is a need for psych disciplines to move outside the clinic and try to understand and perceive the source that affect people and actually affect people's lives. And what I conclude, actually there is an issue with, yeah. Sorry, one moment. Yeah, so what I concluded that there is a lack of political empathy in side disciplines, and how the state and psychiatry or side disciplines align together to actually silence the voices or agency of people who are affected or affected by this kind of structural violence or oppression from the society or the state. I think I can stop because I'm not able to like upload the PPT also. Am I audible now?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Rajesh, he has concluded. He has concluded.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sudarshan. I'm so sorry I could not connect in the initial few minutes because of the network issue. And yeah, your voice was also, I think, broken up at several occasions.
Yeah, because it's raining heavily, so I have a very bad internet connection now.
Yeah, it could be connection issue. So anyway, so let us open this forum for discussion. I would request the participants as well as the students to ask the questions very precisely and briefly, so that I think at least majority of the students will get a chance to ask questions and clarifications. We have 30 minutes for question answer session. So yeah, let us start the question answer session or discussion. You can also write your question in the chat box. There's no questions.
No, Dr. Sudarshan, maybe I can just ask one of the skills that you mentioned in connection with your talk was the fact that that when vulnerability is overstated in the vulnerability stress model, it reinforces the idea that adverse contexts are consequences and not causes. If you could just explain that a little bit more.
Yeah. So in vulnerability stress model, what is said that this vulnerability and stress actually combines together to produce distress. So the consequences that the contexts are seen as consequences and not cause, because when vulnerability is given more emphasis, like the people who are vulnerable or marginalized sections, most of the times it is said that they require health services because they are vulnerable, so they require health services. But at a point where they are suffering from structural violence or social suffering, it is the context which is actually causing that distress, not the consequence. So it is actually, when vulnerability is actually given more emphasis, it overstates the vulnerability than the context. So context becomes understated, and the vulnerability of the person which is inside that person need to be changed. So most of the interventions in psychology or psychiatry would understate the socio-political factors of the context. It will decontextualize or depoliticize and medicalize and psychiatrize, so that the individual is receiving the intervention, not the society. So most of the times it is disorder is actually diagnosed on the person, not on the, if a context is disordered, and the person has to adjust to that particular context. individual need to change, not the context. I think I'm clear.
Yeah, you've addressed the query. Thank you.
Hello, sir. I have a doubt.
Sudarshan, can you hear me?
But I have a question.
Dr.
Yeah,
Sudarshan, Dr.
I can hear.
Sudarshan, Dr.
I
Sudarshan, can
can
you
hear.
hear me?
I can hear.
I am your Varghese Paul.
Sir, sir, please, sir.
Is it audible? Is it
Sir, I
audible?
can hear you.
Yes,
Sir, I
yes,
can
it is
hear you.
audible.
Okay. Let me congratulate Dr. Sudarshan for the wonderful presentation. Being my student, I am very proud of you. And
Thank
also congratulating the Department of Urban Development or Rural Development of TISS Hyderabad for holding this such a wonderful talk series. All the very best for the organizers as well as the today's resource person. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Dr.
Thank you, sir.
Sudarshan, there is
To the
a
question,
question
sir,
in the
I
chat
have a
box.
doubt.
So actually, my screen is blinking, so I can't actually see the chat box. That is also a problem.
Yeah, shall I read out the question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, how this is a question from Dushyant. How we should address and tackle the space-time sufferings of migrant workers?
Okay, I don't understand what is space time. Is it the movement in space and time? What?
Yeah, Dushyant, can you please clarify what do you mean by
Yes,
space-time?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Hello,
yeah.
sir. I mean,
Okay.
space time. I mean to say that space could be like the area. Means if we consider
Okay.
whole India. So as you
Okay.
said, your presentation, whatever you said, it was basically means it was filtered towards the south states. So like Karnataka and all. So if we considered whole India, so space, the distance it covered increases. So how we should take all the migrant workers all over the country, and what and the time we provide them, means in how much time we should, it would be appropriate to tackle their problem.
Okay.
This I mean, yes, sir.
Okay. So with regard to the mental health policies, it is pan-India because it was introduced by not any single state, because it came from the union government of India, asking all the centrally run tertiary institutions, 3 mental health institutions, to provide and assist the state governments to provide telecounseling as well as mental health services, including the psychopharmaceuticals need to be provided in the district mental health programs. It need to be extended to the people. So your question, it's like very difficult to answer, because I think migrant workers crisis which happened, which I have read closely, I think most of the problems would have been addressed if the state had a very robust policy, because we don't have a data, like Professor Rajan talks about lack of data at all with migrant worker, but Kerala state was the only state which had data. That is the reason why Kerala could actually approach the court and say that we are having this much people in the Gulf, please let them return. But no other state had data. So there is an invisibilization by the state, and also Kerala, because like we say health, which is social also, which is also something with like partnership with the community. So Kerala has also shown, like in palliative care movement, Dr. Rajagopal, he talks about health, because if we take the WHO model, like definition of health is social well-being. It's also physical, mental, social well-being. It's not absence of disease. So it also needs partnership. So many of the mainstream health professionals will say that social well-being and other things are not my area, because it needs to be taken care by the others. Road is transport is some others. It is not possible for the health. That is how it is. They are made to forget also. But there are demonstrations by health professionals themselves that health can be co-determined. Health can be co-determined. It can also be it can be brought, like social well-being can be brought by partnering with the community. If you take the example of palliative care movement in Kerala, and the community kitchens which are introduced. It is not. It's so there's a partnership between the state and the community, and there is a regard of that health is something which is not only it rests in the individual, but also with the state, also with the community. So such a partnership, if we can bring out, that actually will create more well-being and appropriate data maintenance and providing basic human rights to people who are migrating, and looking at them as humanizing the data also. Like people say that even sometimes they say that data itself can be used to actually create problems like surveillance and all. So how to humanize that data? So I think most of this, when I'm talking about migrant workers crisis and mental health, so this crisis has I argue that there is no role for mental health professionals, provided there is severe shortage of professionally trained mental health professionals to actually look after seriously ill people. So there is no, because this is a human rights crisis, and even if mental health professionals are involved, they can coordinate and collaborate with human rights, other community organizations, but they don't come out. They don't come out of the four walls. They want to give individual interventions only, because that is something which is more harmful, because you are trying to say that you are having problem and you need to change, and your brain is actually having problem when the person is actually suffering out of this kind of horrendous policies.
Sir?
Yeah, please.
Sir, I would like to add one thing. Like
Okay.
you said, means there should be a robust policy that a government should come to tackle
Okay.
this problem. So, in this pandemic situation, if we see around, we are constantly asked to made a social distance, and and on the contrary, as WHO defines health, it also includes the social interaction between every individual and community. So in that case, I don't think that only a robust policy would be sufficient enough. Means there should be a collaborative and integrated approach of every individual. But this lockdown and all situations is not. I think it's restricting us, and it's very difficult to tackle this.
True.
Mental health of the migrant.
Yeah, that is. So I think, we even the people say, right, like physical distancing is the right word to use, like not social distancing, because we need to get connected, and that social anchoring is very important. So I think the way in which we collaborate, even with physical distancing, how the state or the community resources can be mobilized and self-help can be brought in, that actually can go a long way. Like community kitchens which were introduced, like where people could make a phone call and come. So it is all coming from, even that is actually done by following the social distancing also. But I am not an expert to speak about how the social distancing and the medical, whether it is helping or not helping, because it's a very I am not an expert to say about that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Surbi, could you please ask that question? You have a question, right, in the chat box? Surbi is there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please ask that question.
My question is that in one of your slides, you have mentioned about cognitive justice. So can you please elaborate more on what it is and how it is related to mental health in migrant workers?
Okay. So cognitive justice is a term coined by Shiva Vishwanathan, who is now a professor in Sivanada University. He's a so many books. I don't remember the book in which this term is mentioned. So cognitive justice basically means how, because at the cognitive level, as far as I understand, it is when we related to migrant workers crisis, when it was lockdown was imposed at 8 a.m. and there was only 4 hours given to impose the lockdown, like to have the to go back or whatever to face this. So this actually shows how the government was completely oblivious of the lakhs and lakhs of migrant workers who are spread out across the country. So there is not even they are completely out of the mindset of the policy makers or the government. So there is no cognitive justice. We are not acknowledging. There is nothing cognitively you are acknowledging that existence of a person. So we talk about like existential, when you acknowledge a person, you acknowledge their existence. So there's natural justice. So to acknowledge someone. So that acknowledgement itself is not coming. So we are not cognitively even thinking that they are completely away from their thought, because only when we cognitively think about certain section, we can have action. So cognition, emotion, action, all are interrelated. Like when we feel sad for someone or something, we think how can we help, and that help actually translates to action. So action comes out of that interaction with all this. So cognition can lead to emotion, emotion can lead to cognition also. These three, how behavior is influenced by emotion and cognition. So that is why certain Dr. Rajagobar, also from palliative care, he talks about there is now that love has been lost in healthcare, because there is only images and technology based healthcare, where when a patient comes, we don't even look at that person, we are looking at the images. So it actually completely mechanized understanding, that where emotion is seen as something. Love in healthcare, it will be looking like very unscientific. So it is not scientific. And so he himself says in his experience that when he was studying for MBBS and all, there will be cancer patients with lot of pain. So when he used to see that, he used to experience this, people crying, and he used to ask his professor, like, how can we actually reduce this pain? The professors used to say that this is part of disease. We need not look at it. We need to dehumanize. We need to move away from that. This is a part of disease. But that actually had a deep impact on that doctor. And when he became an anesthesiologist, he thought, like, how can I actually intervene as pain? So there is how beyond medicine. So he said that there is limit to cure, but there is no limit to care. So there is a need to humanize medicine also. So the humanism comes from cognitive justice also. Like when we look at society, when we look at so deeply about societal structures, structural violence, social sufferings, all this, how are society, social realities. This is also part of suffering only, like how health, when it is experienced, it is coming from so many vectors. So I think that is required for everyone, including health professionals also.
Okay, thank you.
So can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Hello, Sudarshan sir. It was a great
Yeah,
talk. I have a doubt, sir. In one of your works, you said psychiatry has often been employed as a political tool to support destructive regimes and reinforce social control. Can you throw some light on this?
Okay. So if you take the history of psychiatry, if you take the history of diagnostic categories of psychiatry also, we see there is a diagnosis was dysesthesia epsiopsis, which is when a when the slaves run away from masters, it was diagnosed as dysesthesia epsiopsis, where the treatment was whipping, and if the person is not relenting, then the toe has to be removed. So that is actually documented in psychiatric history. And also, if you take the Nazi phase, there were many diagnoses which were done against the protesters, and and also during apartheid in South Africa. If you take, there's a book called Schizophrenia as a Black Disease, where most of the schizophrenia diagnoses were given to Black people who were actually protesting, who were having this anti-apartheid movement. So even now, if you take USA, most of the diagnosis of schizophrenia, because once a mental health diagnosis is done, it not only creates a diagnosis, it also takes away citizenship also, because you have no right to vote, you are completely silenced. So psychiatry has a social role also, beyond the clinic or the hospital. It also affects social functioning also. The relationship with the state itself is actually affected due to the diagnosis. So even if you take LGBT issue also, like how the mental health professionals, even now we see conversion therapies happening now, and how the medical, the social and the legal all came together to suppress the LGBT population, because medical said it is pathological, then the state says it is illegal, then the moral says it is immoral, like the society says it's immoral. So in that, you can you can have so many instances of psychiatry aligning with the state, because it actually has a power, psychiatry has more power to not only restrict you in the hospital, also restrict you as a personhood. Your citizenship itself is actually can be affected by the psychiatric diagnosis.
Thank you, sir.
There is a question in the chat box by Rohit. Could you please elaborate about what do you mean by humanizing data?
Okay. So humanizing data, this is like when people say that there is a need for data, but at the same time, if we have data like Aadhaar card, if you take like that pursuit of proof for a person, so we need data to of citizens. But at the same time, this data can be counter productive also. So humanizing data, as far as I understand, is actually not looking at them as just numbers, but also as persons with different aspirations, diverse entities as human beings, and like migrant workers. If you have data, but what kind of, rather than saying that this much money is coming from NRIs to India from migrant, that is the discourse. But what is happening to them and what is the problem that are facing, all this. So that actually is lacking. So we have, like in migration also, Professor, I am not an expert in migration, but Professor Yudhaya Rajan of Center for Development Studies, Trivandrum, he says that there is no that we have NSSO data, we have, because it is a part of that survey only, but we don't have a larger, because migration is seen as very significant because it's creating employment, creating economic development. But at the same time, state is actually creating data only on the aspect of finance, economic aspect, but not on, like, that is the reason why he says during COVID-19, Kerala is the only state which would actually act on this, because there was no data with other states as to go to the court and say that we have this much of people there and here. So there is no migration survey also, because we had surveys, but we don't actually want this, like how where they are migrating to re-migrate, or they are coming back and what they are doing. So that that numbering of people, not only numbering but also moving beyond that numbers to understand that social context also, to how to actually intervene in times of crisis. I'm not an expert in that, so as far as I understood, that is what is meant by humanizing that. And maybe you can consult with, maybe you can read Professor Yudhaya Rajan. He has done a lot of work on migration, and on YouTube also you can find so many lectures by him.
Yeah, Dr. Sudarshan, there is one more question in the chat box.
Okay.
What could be, this is by Roja. what could be done to make the migrants understand the importance of their mental health?
Okay, so this is a very like this is what this is. I think importance of mental health, like because this is coming from professionals understand. Like we understand mental health in terms of because you have studied about, you have read in books, you have knowledge about psychiatry, psychology. These are mental health professionals, and there is lack of access to services. So this question of mental health comes from our understanding. But when we talk to a migrant worker, maybe the notion of mental health itself would be different. So I don't think that there is a need to have awareness creation for migrant workers as there is a need for you to come and access mental health services, because mental health services can be anything that actually ameliorates suffering. But mental health services mostly say that you need psychotherapy and you need psychopharmaceuticals that will actually reduce suffering. But suffering is something which can also be addressed by various other measures also, that mental health professionals need not be there, and mental health professionals can also be there. They can also do certain other measures. So mental health awareness in migrant workers, I think that is not something that can be thought of, because mental health is a mental illness or mental dysfunction is a consequence of a migration, and that vulnerability, that they are vulnerable, that itself is something where we try to say that people who are in certain categories are actually need health services, but they don't. I don't think they require mental health services. They need more protection, social security, job tenure, and protection from the state, from discrimination or whatever. That normally that will ecologically evolve. So mental health will ecologically evolve rather than providing services. So it need to evolve from a context which is very accommodating, accepting, and which is infused with human rights and civil rights, everything. So that will automatically evolve if there is a context which is set. So mental health professionals also should think of rallying together with human rights activists or human rights academicians or social scientists in thinking about or voicing for that. So that is also part of social change. So even the Supreme Court in its 2018 judgment on IPC 377 said that mental health professionals almost always do individual treatment, but it's also your responsibility to initiate social change, because homosexuality is not something people are suffering not because there is a problem inside the person, inside the it is due to the toxic context. So if social context is improved, the person normally normally will experience mental well-being. That is why even now if you see certain research report where LGBT accommodation is more, suicide rate is very less. But if the LGBT discrimination is very high in a society, normally so where should be the intervention? It should be at a systemic level. So mental health professionals also should think beyond the individual to actually make systems robust. And so that is why people talk about, even within psychiatric clinical psychology, they talk about traveling beyond the clinic to so that they understand at least, because the mainstream mental health professional training, everything is something like it takes a very reductionistic understanding about mental health, as if it is something that is provided by the mental health professional and there is a person who needs it. It becomes a very hierarchical, power-ridden relationship. Like I have mental health professional is the person who is the knowledgeable person who needs to provide services. But experience is also an expert knowledge. So that expert experience problem, like who is experiencing that issue. So we may say that it is depression, but that person might have certain experiences about what we term it as depression. It may be completely different, but there is no effort put into understand. So there is complete annihilation of that experience, that the personhood. It's only patienthood. A person is having depression, treat it. That person is there, not there. The only disease is there. Only cure is there. There is no care, because you are not understanding that person. Then how can care be given?
Yeah, I think we can take up one more question. Jugal?
Yes, sir. Can I be heard?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you very much.
Can you repeat? I can't hear. There was a disturbance. Can you repeat?
Can I be heard?
There is a break in your voice. Can you repeat? Or you can type also because now I can see my chat box. Maybe you can try to speak once more. Maybe I might hear you.
Sir, is it any better now?
Yeah. Now I can hear you.
Thank you very much, sir. Um, uh, Sir, you mute your audio because I think that's an echo. Okay. Sir, I remember reading your article in Mad in
Go ahead,
Asia.
Google.
Can I be heard?
Yeah, you're audible. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm so sorry. Sir, Sudarshan sir, I remember reading your article in Mad in Asia once where you talked about your uh, not so good experiences at your MPhil program during your MPhil program because there was a complete sidelining of critical decolonizing, social science based perspectives. And today we were talking about how the reason there's such a dominance of empiricist psychology right now that actually stops us from holding the people at the higher power accountable for our own mental health issues. And I think uh, so I was just wondering that it's, like in India I see that that we tend to copy and paste the psychology from the West, and there is no attempt to decolonize our own psychology or to make it more indigenous. Like right now in America, there has been an emergence of African psychology, so as to take the black person's needs into consideration, their mental health needs into consideration. But in India, I think the colonization still remains, and on top of it, I don't see any emergence of Dalit psychology. I don't see any emergence of tribal psychology or even indigenous queer psychology for that matter. Queer theory does exist. It is taught in English departments, but even that theory, though I don't specialize in it, but I think it only represents the issues of the issues and the problems of the queer people abroad. So I was just wondering if you could spare a thought on how Indian institutions act as a gatekeeper, and how they sideline decolonizing or critical perspectives in psychology, and how they have enabled the dominance of the white man over psychology, how they have enabled the dominance of, and what could be the way ahead. Like, if you could touch upon that, I would be grateful, though you have already touched upon that to some extent in your PPT. But yeah, I mean, if you could. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. Yeah, so it's very pertinent question that decolonizing psychology. So, as you rightly pointed out, the whole of psych discipline, psychiatry, psychology, psychiatric social work, and psychiatric nursing, which are the four professions that we see, discipline which we see in a mental health institution. So, if you take these four disciplines also, it inherently has this hierarchy, like psychiatry, then clinical psychology, and also all of this derives from psychiatry basically. And psychiatry, as you said, it's also coming from the whole Western models of psychiatry. So it's very true. So as far as my experience in two mental health institutions are concerned, as you said, it is completely bureaucratic, it's very technocratic, and it is very siloed, and it lives in silos, it's an island, and there is only room for the discussions about mental health from the perspectives which are already there in the textbook. There is no critical perspectives at all. And even to do any research beyond that clinical setting, I wanted to do beyond, not with the clinical population, but I was not allowed. So that kind of insularity is there in mental health disciplines. And if you take the global mental health movement also, the same thing happened. Like that is the reason why people have actually spoken against global universalizing mental health. So even in India, if you take, like you said about tribal psychology or this queer psychology and all, because most of the psychologies have been homogenized. There is like global WHO or the global psychiatry. So even people say there cannot be global mental health because it's an oxymoron, because mental health cannot be global, because it needs to be local, because people are living, because even the brain also, like, because most of the time what happens, this universalization comes because brain is seen as the site of intervention and equated with the mind. So in all these disciplines, because it's derived from psychiatry also, mostly this this idea is there. So brain, even if it is looked at, well, even brain is seen as a level playing field. Brain in USA and brain in a tribal village in India cannot be seen as the same, because it is shaped by that culture. So it is shaped by their interaction. So brain is actually challenging the self, and the self is actually challenging the brain. So even though it is objective in nature, brain in US and brain India will have the same cerebrum, cerebellum, all kind of this one, but that producing that subjectivity is completely different. What I talk, what I experience, everything is different. So there is always the brain is actually constantly challenging that self. Objectivity is challenging subjectivity, and that self is actually constantly challenging the brain. So this is like chicken egg. So, but there is no recognition. So without that recognition, like queer experience also, if you take, like it is, but it is seen as something like it is like homogenized, like there is depression. Okay, then depression, because it is a brain problem, it is, so irrespective of whatever categories or wherever you are living, whatever, you have depression. And what is the mode of treatment? It is antidepressants, and for psychology it will be cognitive behavioral therapy, which is individual one-to-one. You try to adjust with your cognition, and you change your cognition so that you adjust with the situation. So there is no talk about contexts. So it is completely decontextualizing. So psychology, as you rightly said, we need a decolonized psychology, and people are working also, some of them, about decolonizing psychology and bringing out indigenous, that cultural formulation of, like if you take DSM-5, now because of the research and contributions of cross-cultural psychiatrists, trans-cultural psychiatrists and psychologists, cultural theorists and all, anthropology, medical anthropology, anthropology of psychology, mental health and all. Now we say that in DSM it has recognized that there need to be a cultural formulation, cultural in interview, because that diagnostic interview need to take into account the cultural aspect of the person. Otherwise, it will actually lead to misdiagnosis and overdiagnosis, because we are not understanding that person from their perspective. We are imposing our model, and this Western model is only one model, because there are so many psychiatries. So if you take Japan, there was no concept about depression there, but there is a book called Depression in Japan, where now, because of the globalizing psychiatry, that it has, depression has become one of the most common. And even Sri Lanka, if you take Abhay Shegare, who wrote, he's a psychiatrist, Suman Fernando is a psychiatrist, because in Sinhala or in the Buddhist tradition, experiencing of sadness is something is seen as something very fruitful and a path to liberation, all this. So this concept of depression itself is not there in Sri Lankan society. But now, because everywhere there is psychiatry and colonized, because Sri Lanka is also a colonized country like India. So we have our history of psychiatry itself starts from colonial rule, because we have asylum, we had asylums. So there started psychiatry. So we don't have another history of psychiatry itself in India. All psychiatry starts from asylums, and still it is that, like what is the mainstream, Nimhans or Tezpur or Ranji, everything is the institutions modeled during the colonial rule, and these are the national institutions of national importance, which are acting as apex institution. I'm not saying because of that, but what is followed there is also completely influenced by the global and very less emphasis on local understandings or even qualitative research. So even when I was studying, maybe I wanted to just touch upon that. that research is equated to statistics and quantitative research in psychology. I did qualitative research in my career. Only when I went to IIT for PhD, I got opportunity to study qualitative, because the paper in MPhil clinical psychology itself is termed research and statistics. That means even there is no single word of qualitative research. That means there is complete erasing of experiential account. Like every experience can be made into a number. It can be encapsulated into a number through psychiatric so many tests. Like we have psychological questionnaires, like depression in every. Okay, you have 14 points, so you are suffering from mild depression. Okay, then what is the next step? It's an algorithm, like we see in any other. So that is not helping actually. It is actually causing a lot of problems. So when I saw, maybe if you have read that, when Bangladeshi people who were termed as migrants, illegal migrants, they are also like completely like there is no, their experiences are never, because when I try to, I don't know language also, when I try to listen, it is, you are not skilled, because you need to diagnose within 60 minutes. You cannot prolong your interview beyond that. Within that, if you don't diagnose, you are an unskilled clinician. So there is a lot of technocratization in health, also in mental health, which is very, very, very harmful for mental health, as far as I understand, as far as my experience goes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sudarshan. Dr. Sudarshan, thank you so much. Before I invite Need to deliver a lot of thanks, there is a small announcement about next week's. It will be delivered by Dr. Madhavi Jha, associated with Jawaharlal Nehru University, and the topic would be Gender and Caste on Farming Public Works in Colonial North India. Yeah, now I invite Praneeth.
Thank you, Dr. Rajesh. Good evening, everyone. It's my privilege to propose vote of thanks today. I'm Praneeth Sai on behalf of Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Program of Rural Development and Governance. I extend my sincere gratitude to Dr. Sudarshan R Kottai for delivering the talk on his work, mental health and migrant workers, and for helping us understand what migrant workers have undergone in the light of COVID-19 pandemic, and also giving us a psychological dimension to their issues. It was a very insightful lecture, sir. I would also like to take this opportunity to place on record a hearty thanks to Dr. Srinivas Surisetti for his unstinting support to organize this talk series. I also extend my thanks to Dr. Rajesh for his involved engagement with the topic, Dr. Shahul for setting the terms of the Grameen Talk series, Amit Upadhyay sir for the support and guidance he has extended to all of us, and also thanks to all the other faculty members. I would like to thank Surabhi for introducing the speaker and all the other seniors for their support. Last but not the least, I extend my gratitude to all the students of various courses for attending the talk and making it successful. Thank you one and all. And we apologize for not including the accessible link along with the poster, and hope the second round of emails resolve that issue. And also apologies for not including women in the poster, as they also form a major portion of migrant workers, and we'll rectify in the next one. And once again, thank you very much to all for attending the session.
Thank you so much, and thanks to Dr. Amit Upadhyay, Dr. Rajesh, and Dr. Shahul Ameen, and for inviting me, and also for all the logistical support. And I'm also sorry about my internet issues, which actually disrupted the flow of the talk, and also for the wonderful questions. And all the best for the Grameen Talk series.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. So let us wind up the session.